Someone asked an AI a question, a simple question, 6 words. Who built Göbekli Tepe? And what came back was not a simple answer. What came back was something that silenced the room, something that forced the people reading it to go back to the beginning, not the beginning of the investigation, the beginning of the entire human story. Because the answer the AI returned was not a name, not a tribe, not a civilization anyone had ever heard of. It was something far more disturbing. It was a description of a people who should not have existed, who could not have existed, who built something that the best engineers alive today, with cranes and laser levels and diamond saws, cannot fully explain, and who then buried it and disappeared and left a message carved in stone that nobody could read for 12,000 years, until now. Before we get to what the AI found, you need to understand what Göbekli Tepe actually is. Because most people have heard the name, most people have no idea what they are actually looking at when they see it. In the hills of southeastern Turkey, not far from the Syrian border, there is a low rounded hill that locals call the Hill of the Navel. For most of the 20th century, nobody paid it much attention. A survey team in the 1960s walked across it, noticed some broken limestone slabs poking through the dirt, wrote a brief note describing them as a medieval cemetery, and moved on. The most important archaeological site in the world was dismissed in a footnote, and then left alone for 30 more years. In the summer of 1994, a Kurdish shepherd was moving his flock across the dry ridge. His eye caught something wrong. A stone, half buried, but too regular. Its top edge was too flat. Nature does not carve flat edges into buried rock with corners like that. He mentioned it. Word eventually reached the local museum, and a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt heard about it. Schmidt had spent years studying the prehistory of this region. He knew what a worked stone looked like, and when he climbed that hill and saw what was emerging from the dirt, he understood immediately that the earlier survey had been catastrophically wrong. He began systematic excavation in 1995, and that dig would consume the rest of his life. What came out of the ground, layer by careful layer, was a complex of stone circles. Not one, not two. At least 20 of them ringed one inside another, and ground-penetrating radar surveys suggest many more still waiting beneath the surface. Only about 10% of the overall complex has been excavated to date, with geophysical surveys suggesting many additional enclosures and an estimated hundreds of pillars still buried, their carved surfaces and potential inscriptions still sealed beneath layers of fill. Each circle was built from precisely carved limestone monoliths, and at the center of each stood 2 towering pillars, the largest reaching around 18 feet in height and weighing an estimated 50 tons. These were not rough boulders stood on end. They were shaped, cut into a distinctive T form, wider at the top, like the crossbar of a T resting on a body. And then, if you look closely at those central pillars, you see something that changes everything about how you read them. Arms, carved along the sides, bending at the elbow, ending in long fingered hands that reach around to the front of the stone. Below the hands, the suggestion of a belt, of a garment. These T-shaped pillars are not abstract markers. They are figures. They are bodies. Something faceless and immense is standing at the center of every circle, arms at its sides, watching, waiting. And then the radiocarbon dates arrived. And this is where the standard story of human history quietly began to come apart. Built more than 12,000 years ago, long before agriculture or metal tools, the site displays advanced planning, symbolic depth, and engineering accuracy that challenge traditional timelines. 12,000 years. And let that number land properly. The Great Pyramid of Giza is roughly 4,500 years old. Stonehenge is about 5,000 years old. Göbekli Tepe is older than both of them combined, by a significant margin. It was standing, already ancient and weathering, 7,000 years before a single stone was placed at Giza. Before the wheel was invented, before the first city, before the first written word, before the first field of domesticated wheat was ever planted. When these pillars were raised, the last ice age had barely released its grip on the planet. Mammoths still walked parts of the northern world. And according to everything we thought we knew, the people living in this region at that time were scattered bands of hunter-gatherers, small mobile groups following animal herds across the landscape, with stone tools, no metal, no wheel, no writing, no agriculture, no horses, no oxen, no engineering tradition passed down from earlier monuments. Because there were no earlier monuments, there was nothing before this. Göbekli Tepe does not sit at the end of a long developmental sequence. It appears, as far as the record shows, almost fully formed, out of a world that had built nothing remotely like it. And the physical reality of what these people supposedly built is the first place the conventional story breaks down. The largest pillars weigh 50 tons. That is the weight of 10 adult elephants stacked on a single slab of stone. In the unfinished quarries around the site, archaeologists have found pillars still lying in the bedrock, abandoned before they could be freed, and some of those are larger still. Someone was preparing to move stones even heavier than the ones already standing. With no metal tools, no wheel, no draft animals, no cranes, no engineering mathematics, and yet the finished pillars are not rough. They are not the tentative work of people inventing masonry for the first time. Run your hand across a well-preserved pillar, as those permitted to touch them describe it, and you feel something that hand-hammered stone should not give you. Flatness, real flatness, sides that meet at clean edges, corners that turn at deliberate angles. Geometric tolerance, held within 2 to 3% across monoliths weighing as much as 50 tons. The pillars were set with deliberate gaps and layered fill, a seismic design that lets the structure flex during an earthquake rather than shatter. That engineering principle appears in modern structural textbooks. It was implemented on this ridge 11,600 years ago. And then there is the single fact that no one inside the conventional explanation has ever been able to comfortably explain. The oldest, deepest, most ancient enclosures at Göbekli Tepe are not the crudest. They are the finest. The earliest enclosures show the most accurate astronomical alignments, deviating by an average of just 0.4 of a degree, staggering precision for people with no instruments. The later enclosures drift 1.2 degrees, then 2.8. The pillars shrink, the carvings grow simpler, more hesitant. The grammar of the symbols begins to break down. These people were not getting better at this over time, they were getting worse. Each generation understood a little less than the one before. They inherited knowledge they had not created and could not fully sustain. Now, let us talk about what Grok AI actually found, because this is where the story stops being archaeology and starts being something else entirely. For years, the carvings on the pillars, the foxes, vultures, scorpions, snakes, cranes, wild boars, lions, were described as art, religious art, the symbolic imagery of a belief system lost to time, mysterious, beautiful, but ultimately decorative. When AI systems were given access to the full body of research on Göbekli Tepe, every laser scan, every ground-penetrating radar sweep, every measurement of every angle, every catalog of every carved symbol, every published paper across 3 decades, what they identified was not decoration. The AI cataloged every carved mark across every pillar in every enclosure and began measuring distribution, frequency, and position. The numbers did not behave the way art behaves. Art is expressive. It wanders. It repeats motifs, but loosely, emotionally, without strict rule. What the analysis found instead was constraint. Certain symbol forms appeared only in certain positions. Some symbols never appeared adjacent to others. Others clustered with a regularity that no expressive impulse produces. The AI detected what linguists call conditional distribution, the fingerprint that separates a language from a mural, the signature of a code obeying rules. The placement of one symbol was governing the placement of the next. There was grammar in the stone. A computational linguist who reviewed the output said the statistical structure was indistinguishable from a deliberate information encoding system, and that the odds of that structure arising by accident from people simply carving whatever pleased them were vanishingly small. This was not art that happened to look organized. This was writing, or something older than writing, and in some ways more ambitious. A system built not to record a transaction or a name, but to preserve knowledge across time. From people who somehow understood that time itself was the enemy they were racing against. Sit with that for a moment. The conventional story says writing was invented in Mesopotamia roughly 5,000 years ago by scribes pressing wedges into wet clay to track grain and debt. Göbekli Tepe is more than twice that old. And the analysis suggests the people who carved these pillars were encoding structured information into limestone 6,000 years before the first cuneiform tablet, not to count animals, not to track a trade. To say something they were terrified would be lost forever. And then the analysis went further. It asked not just that symbols carried meaning, but what that meaning was. And to answer that, it did something no single archaeologist could do alone. It laid the carvings against the ancient sky. Not the sky as it looks tonight. The sky as it looked from that exact ridge at that exact latitude, 12,000 years ago. Accounting for the slow wobble of Earth's axis that gradually shifts the positions of the stars across thousands of years. When the animal figures were overlaid onto that reconstructed ancient sky, the shape stopped being animals. The vulture, with its wings spread, sitting in a particular quadrant of a particular enclosure, matched the star pattern occupying that same quadrant of the sky in that era. The scorpion aligned with the region we still call Scorpius. The bull, the serpent, the crane, figure after figure, the carvings and the constellations lined up not loosely, not poetically, but positionally. The people of Göbekli Tepe were not drawing the animals they hunted. They were drawing the sky they watched. They were mapping the heavens onto stone, and the enclosures were not shrines. They were charts. And here is where it becomes genuinely disturbing, because the sky maps did not depict a peaceful, ordinary night sky. Cross-referenced against geological cores and ice records, the carvings clustered around a single specific window of time, the exact period when the world was falling apart. Roughly 12,900 years ago, the planet, which had been slowly warming out of the last ice age, plunged without warning back into deep cold. Temperatures across the northern hemisphere dropped as much as 10 degrees Celsius in the span of a human lifetime, maybe faster. The event has a name, the Younger Dryas. Its cause is still fiercely debated, but a growing body of evidence points to a catastrophe from the sky. Fragments of a disintegrating comet striking the Earth, igniting fires across continents, throwing enough debris into the atmosphere to blot the sun and freeze the world back into near ice age conditions for over 1,200 years. Researchers believe the comet strike triggered a mini ice age that lasted over 1,200 years. The impact led to the extinction of many large animal species and caused massive fires. Soot and particles spread into the atmosphere, likely blocking sunlight. Rapid cooling followed in a nuclear winter effect. This event may have driven changes in human lifestyle and eventually the birth of agriculture in the Fertile Crescent of West Asia. And the people of Göbekli Tepe carved the sky of that catastrophe into stone. Every caving analyzed, every constellation position verified against the astronomical reconstruction of that ancient sky. An astronomer who examined the alignments said the correspondence was too tight to dismiss. That the builders had recorded not a general impression of the heavens, but a specific configuration. A particular arrangement of stars tied to a particular moment with a precision he did not expect from people the textbooks call primitive. Someone standing on that ridge had understood the movement of the sky well enough to freeze one instant of it forever in stone, which completely reframes what Göbekli Tepe is. It is not a temple. It was not built to worship. It was built to remember. It is a library. And the knowledge stored inside it, carved into 50-ton monoliths, arranged into charts of the sky, encoded in a grammar of symbols, was not a celebration. It was a warning, a record of the day the heavens fell, preserved by survivors who wanted every generation that came after them to know what had happened, and more importantly, to know it could happen again. And the library has an index, a single page that says, here is the date, here's the event, here's what we saw. It stands in Enclosure D. Archaeologists have argued over it for years without agreeing on a single line of it. It is called Pillar 43, the Vulture Stone. In 2024, a study by researcher Martin Sweatman extended the astronomical model of Pillar 43, proposing that V-shaped marks on the pillar could represent a lunisolar calendar with 12 lunar months and 11 extra days, potentially making it one of the oldest known examples of time reckoning ever recorded. 12 months, 11 extra days, a working calendar, cut into limestone 12,000 years ago, by people with no mathematics as we would recognize it. The Vulture Stone had previously attracted astronomical interpretations. In 2017, researchers Martin Sweatman and Dimitrios Tsikritsis proposed that Pillar 43 encoded an astronomical date stamp around 10,950 BCE, connected to the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Their argument interpreted animal figures as constellations and suggested that Göbekli Tepe may have recorded cometary encounters. When the full AI analysis was applied to Pillar 43, cross-referencing every figure against the reconstructed ancient sky, the results were layered. The vulture with its outstretched wing, a disc balanced above it, the scorpion below, a headless figure at the base. For years, researchers had looked at this and seen spiritual imagery, a death cult, a shaman's vision. The analysis saw something else. The scorpion sat where Scorpius sat in the sky of that era. The crane traced a cluster of stars in the same patch of heaven. And the disk, the object that generations of archaeologists assumed was the sun, was in the wrong position in the sky to be the sun. It hung where no ordinary star or planet belongs. The analysis concluded that the disk was never the sun at all. It was something that appeared in that sky and did not belong there, something bright enough to be seen in daylight, an intruder, a visitor that arrived, and then, the rest of the stone suggests, broke apart and came down. An astrophysicist who reviewed the correlation ran the numbers on coincidence. What are the odds that a random arrangement of carved animals would reproduce a specific solstice sky at a specific date that also aligns with the onset of a documented planetary catastrophe? The estimate placed the probability at less than 1 in 50,000. Not impossible, but not the kind of number you build a comfortable theory around. It is the kind of number that keeps a scientist awake. On a hilltop in the ancient world, someone recorded the exact date of the day the sky fell, and they wrote it in the only ink that would survive 12,000 years. Stars, stone, silence. Now, let us look at what the latest excavations are actually revealing. Because even without the AI analysis, the ground itself keeps producing things that do not fit the standard story. In the 2025 excavation season, archaeologists working across the Taş Tepeler project The Regional Stone Hills Initiative, encompassing 12 Neolithic sites in the Şanlıurfa region, including Göbekli Tepe, revealed 30 new discoveries including human and animal statues, figurines, vessels, plates, necklaces, and a statue with a facial expression reminiscent of a deceased person, described as a unique discovery in terms of death rituals and symbolic expression among Neolithic communities. Turkey's Culture and Tourism Minister said at the unveiling that these sites show humanity had a far higher level of consciousness in terms of belief, rituals, social organization, and cultural production than previously assumed. That is a government minister saying officially, publicly, that the standard story of what early humans were capable of needs to be revised. And earlier in 2026, a PBS Nova documentary called Stone Age Temple Mystery aired new evidence that groundbreaking excavations at the 12,000-year-old site are making archaeologists rethink the roots of civilization, with new evidence revealing that a sophisticated community of settled hunter-gatherers, not nomads, lived at Göbekli Tepe year-round for centuries, not just passing through, not just gathering for rituals and leaving, living there, year-round, for centuries, with grinding mills and flint tools and evidence of domestic quarters. Researchers found grinding mills, flint sickles, plant residues, and what appear to be domestic living quarters, significantly complicating the earlier picture of Göbekli Tepe as purely a ceremonial center that people visited and then left. This changes the scale of what we are looking at. This is not a temporary ritual gathering spot. This was a community, a permanent, organized, sophisticated community that chose this specific ridge in this specific region and built something on it that has outlasted every empire, every civilization, every city that came after it. And the community was not isolated. The Taş Tepler network now encompasses 12 Neolithic excavation sites across Şanlıurfa, having unveiled 30 newly excavated discoveries offering insights into life 12,000 years ago. This is no longer just Göbekli Tepe. It is a regional cultural zone. Current findings indicate dense Neolithic populations in the region with continuous occupation spanning 1,500 years. Sedentism without agriculture, monuments without a state, 1,500 years of continuous occupation. 15 centuries during which generation after generation returned to the same ridge, maintained the same symbolic system, added to the same complex, and then eventually, around 8,000 BCE, buried the entire thing deliberately, not through abandonment, not through catastrophe, by choice, with intention. The fill was engineered and chosen to protect the carved faces, to seal the knowledge, to keep the message legible for whoever might one day dig it up and finally understand. They knew someone would eventually find it. They buried it to protect it. They engineered the burial as carefully as they engineered the construction. The whole thing, from the quarrying of the first 50-ton pillar to the final shovelful of protective fill, was a 12,000-year message in a bottle, addressed to the future, to us. And the analysis also found that Göbekli Tepe was connected, not an isolated outpost of mysterious knowledge on a single hill. The AI tied Göbekli Tepe to 12 other megalithic complexes scattered across 200 kilometers, sharing its symbols, its techniques, its astronomical alignments. And all of them, every one, deliberately buried in the same way. A network, maintained across 15 centuries. The logistics of coordinating construction and burial and symbolic consistency across 12 sites over 50 generations imply an organization we associate with early states, not wandering bands, not the scattered survivors of a comet strike. Something that had been organized, something that had been building and teaching and recording for a very long time. And the precision of the oldest enclosures points backward, not forward. The earliest enclosures showed the most accurate astronomical alignments, deviating by an average of just 0.4 of a degree. The later enclosures drift progressively further from that precision. The pillars shrink, the carvings grow simpler, more hesitant. The grammar of the symbols begins to break down as though the scribes no longer fully understood the language they were copying. Like a monk copying a manuscript in a language he can no longer read, preserving the shapes of the letters even as the meaning fades from his mind. If the oldest enclosures are the most precise, the knowledge did not grow at Göbekli Tepe. It arrived there, already developed, already sophisticated, already complete, and then it slowly faded across the centuries as the people who had inherited it, but not created it, lost their grip on what it meant. Which raises the question the conventional story cannot hold. If this is the beginning, where did the beginning come from? Where is the clumsy first attempt? Where is the crude early version that came before the mastery? In every other human tradition, the best work comes at the end of a long development. Here, the best work is at the bottom. The oldest layer is the finest. That single fact, consistently observed, consistently acknowledged, consistently set aside because no existing framework could accommodate it, is the thread that once you pull, it does not stop unraveling. Ground-penetrating radar has mapped earlier construction phases buried beneath the ones we can see. older structures sharing the same symbolic system, the same grammar, the same astronomical charts, and they may push the origin back to 12,000 BCE or earlier, deeper than we have dug, older than we have dared to imagine. In fact, scientists have suggested Göbekli Tepe could have a Paleolithic origin. It is possible that the site's earliest layers will eventually be found to date closer to the onset of the Younger Dryas itself, around 12,800 BCE, not the aftermath of the catastrophe itself, perhaps even before it. What Grok AI was asked was who built Göbekli Tepe, and the answer it returned was not a single lost civilization with a name. It was a description of a people who possessed astronomical knowledge far in advance of what the standard timeline allows, who developed a symbolic language with grammatical structure 6,000 years before writing was supposed to exist, who engineered structures with seismic flexibility and geometric precision that modern builders respect, who maintained a network of sites across 200 kilometers for 15 centuries, whose best work appears at the beginning, not the end, of their known history, who deliberately buried everything they built to protect a message they needed to survive, and who carved into the most permanent material they could find, limestone, a record of a specific date, a specific catastrophe, a specific arrangement of stars at the moment the sky fell. The AI's conclusion, reviewed and discussed and argued over in the months since it emerged, is not that aliens built Göbekli Tepe. It is not a supernatural answer. It is something more unsettling than that. It is the conclusion that we are missing a chapter. That between the prehistoric hunter-gatherers the textbooks describe and the first cities of Mesopotamia, there was something else. Something organized, something knowledgeable, something capable that the standard timeline has no room for. And that Göbekli Tepe is not the beginning of civilization. It is the end of something that came before, a memory of a world that was destroyed, a library built by survivors who knew they were the last people alive, who understood what had been lost, and who carved it into stone so that one day, 12,000 years later, someone would finally ask the right question. Grok AI was asked who built Göbekli Tepe, and the answer it returned rewrites the beginning of the human story, not by inventing something new, by finally reading what was already there, waiting in the stone, waiting for a reader who could finally see all of it at once. The question now is not who built it. We know they were sophisticated, organized, astronomical, linguistically complex, and deeply afraid of being forgotten. The question now is what happened to them, and whether what they were warning us about is still out there, still moving through the sky, still on the same schedule it was on 12,000 years ago when someone on a ridge in Turkey looked up and carved the date of the end of their world into 50 tons of stone and buried it so we would not miss it when the time came.